top-shelf classic lager, brewed using only the finest noble hops and Canadian malt. This crisp and refreshing lager aims high and scores big. From Lake Bay's Brewing Company in partnership with the NHL Alumni Association. Available at the LCBO and the beer store.
You're listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the show that profiles former NHL players on their playing days and current lives after hockey. Here's your host, Darcy Lynch.
My guest today is Dan Quinn. Played over 800 games in the 80s and 90s with 8 teams, the majority with the Flames and the Penguins. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Darcy. Thanks for having me.
And it's the professional golf world that keeps you busy these days, Dan, but I do want to start by talking about your playing career in the NHL. But even before we get there, starting with the OHL, that you played your junior hockey with the Belleville Bulls, which means I'm sure you were very saddened whenever you heard that the team was coming to an end in the city and moving on this year into Hamilton.
I am, yeah. I was, I don't know, I've had a very nostalgic summer, Darcy, so it's kind of funny that you've reached out. One of them being that I turned 50 on June 1st, so it was just sort of brought back, you kind of go over your life and stuff. But I was their first ever pick in 1981 overall, their first ever pick in Major A. They came from Tier 2 as an expansion team. And so, yeah, to be, 34, 35 years later, that they've moved on, and apparently, that they needed to get a new building and all that stuff. The growth of junior hockey has sort of left them, but it was sad. And I had my original billets actually reconnected with me this summer that I lived with in Belleville, and an old teammate that I played with in Nepean since I was 7 years old, Darren Pang, and I was the first overall pick, and he was the first goalie pick in third. We've actually exchanged texts about it, so it was funny.
You go on from Belleville to be drafted by the Calgary Flames, a first rounder. What was it like breaking in with the Flames and having the late Bob Johnson as your first coach? As it's not an easy transition for any rookie to make, but what was your relationship like with him right out of the gate?
I'm going to be honest. He was an American, and he didn't really understand the 18-year-old college or junior kid that was a first round pick, and a guy like me that was somewhat cocky and expected to play a lot. He didn't. I would think even anybody that played for him those first couple of years in Calgary, he struggled with talented players. But he was a great coach from a learning perspective. I think our power play the first couple of years with Al McGinnis and myself and a couple other guys still to this day has the highest percentage of all time. Badger Bob we had great, Joe Mullen, Hawken Lube, Laney McDonald, we had great right-handed shots and so on and so forth. But if I recall, and Paul Reinhardt, Kent Nielsen, I can go on and on, but, Badger was a great coach. He brought in a lot of the first to do a lot of the X and O stuff. He had a big rink in the middle of the dressing room and a beautiful facility there at the Saddle Dome. And, but I think as time wore on, he moved on, and then obviously had a success when he let the talented players kind of take over and do what they could in Pittsburgh and winning a cup there.
It's tough for any professional athlete to get traded, but most of the former NHLers that have talked about trades in this show have talked about how the toughest one to understand is generally the first one, and it can be a little harder to accept whenever the team that drafted you is moving you along. But in your case, you're moved from Calgary to Pittsburgh, and the timing was it's after the 85-86 season where you guys had a very successful playoff run and go to the finals against the Habs, and it's a team on the rise, and then you move on to Pittsburgh, who at the time was a perennial loser and in a rebuilding era. What was your reaction like, and was that tough to digest when you were first found out that you were being moved along from the Flames to the Penguins?
Well, no, to be honest, as I said, as I look back, I played quite extensively, and if you look, I had a pretty good successful run in those playoffs. We went to the finals in '86, but at the same time, a couple of games, I was left out of the lineup. So it was a hot and cold relationship. But I think I played 18 games with 15 points or something to that effect, and 8 goals in the Stanley Cup playoffs, including the only game winner, shorthanded in the first game against Montreal, and then we lost the next 4. But to answer your question, yeah, I was sort of excited to get traded. I was frustrated with that, one game or one period I was able to kill penalties, but the next period I wasn't good enough to play defense or be in a defensive situation or play the last 3 minutes. And I was always able to get power play time and had great success at that throughout the playoffs. And then I think I led the team in scoring that year too. So it was just a weird dynamic. And as I said, we had a lot of talent in Calgary at that time, a lot of guys coming up, a lot of guys looking to take your job, as well as some established veterans. So it was just a frustrating, growth experience, for lack of a better word. and then off to Pittsburgh I went, but which was actually great in itself. But it was also frustrating that those were my years that I really was working my butt off and playing pretty high level of hockey. And but we unfortunately, with the ownership and the managerial thing, I went. I say this looking back and not making excuses for mistakes that I made later in my career, but I played for, I think, 4 coaches and 3 general managers there in 4 years. So again, when you have a marquee centerman like Mario Lemieux, for one coach you're taking faceoffs, for another coach you replace for faceoffs, for another coach you're a right winger, next for it was weird those 3 years. But that's sort of the way I look back at the Calgary years. It was a great experience, a great group of guys, one of my favorite cities to ever play in. But I was excited to get to Pittsburgh, and I got a lot of ice time there, and it was consistent. I didn't have to worry game in, game out if I was going to play. I got my 25, 26 minutes every game, so it was fun.
In your reference to Mario Lemieux, the downside of getting traded to Pittsburgh at the time that you were is that it's a losing franchise and the ownership isn't stable. But the fact that you get to play with arguably the best player in the game at the time, I'm sure had to be a big positive for you. And what was that like playing with Mario? And you'd played in the league for several seasons at that point and had a successful junior career. But in all your years of playing hockey, had you played with a skill level even close to Mario's at that point?
No, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think, and I say this, looking back at the game and looking at the game as it is now, I still think that of all the great players that I played with, the size of us, the speed, and all that stuff that had Mario played in this day and age, of all the players I played with, he would probably lead the league by 30 or 40 points in scoring. With the way it's refereed now and the rules that are being enforced. To your question, your point, I mean, from blue line to blue line, he had a burst of speed that was unlike anybody. He had the ability to go 6 or 8 feet each way with his wingspan, and he had a great shot. He had unbelievable hands. He had great vision. He was very creative. So yeah, when healthy, I never saw anything like him.
And you eventually moved on and had a couple seasons with the Vancouver Canucks, and that was very early in Trevor Linden's career. And obviously, we all know the storied career that he went on to have in Vancouver. But at your time with the team, was it very noticeable that even though he was such a young cornerstone of the team at the time, that it was really becoming Trevor Linden's team? For
sure, yeah. No, Trevor was he was a very engaging guy. He played a very simple game, but he had he didn't get thrown into like he was a talented player. He could outwork you, he could outgrind you. He had size at the time, early in his career, but just a good young man at the time. As we played a little bit together on the same line, my attitude there deteriorated over the course of that stint, and was one of my biggest regrets as I look back. But Trevor was a great young man, a great player, and he went on to have an incredible career. I think he's back with Vancouver running the show. I think.
Yeah, now he's the top dog.
Well, good for him. He's, like I said, he embraced Vancouver. He got drafted there, and he loved being there. He was a West Coast kid, Western Canada kid, and hopefully they have a great success there in Vancouver, as I know that franchise has become a great value to the city.
And then you also had a couple of stints with the Ottawa Senators from the area where you're from. And what was that like playing so close to your hometown, but also with a team that was in its infancy and such a struggling franchise at the time? Was your overall experience still pretty positive playing in Ottawa?
Yeah, yes and no. I would have loved to. It could have been a lot more. Again, there was going back, but there was some turmoil. There was a coaching change from, a lot of pressure from. First of all, the mistakes that I think Ottawa made in that early couple of years is they drafted kids and let them play. They didn't make them earn their time, so that sort of bit them in the butt a little bit. But I think the world and I stuck up for them. Rick Bowness and Alain Vigneault both are having great successful careers still as coaches, and for some reason they got let go in that second stint that I thought, we really had a decent team that could have maybe been 500 or fought for a playoff spot, and they got rid of them quite early in that season, and it was very frustrating. I was gone shortly thereafter. But I loved Ottawa. I think it's a great city. I grew up there, spent my first 12 years of my life there till I moved to London, and still have family in and around the area, so it's a great city. It's great that the organization has flourished and found a way to succeed financially in that market, and it's great to watch the game and the team be what it is now.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. Coming up, I'll ask Dan Quinn about hanging up the skates and pursuing golf full-time, and also his role as a caddy on the PGA Tour. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear on TSN 690. I'm Darcy Lynch. The show where we discuss the former hockey careers and current lives of former NHL players. My guest today is Dan Quinn. And Dan, it was as soon as you were done playing is whenever I first remember playing in the NHL is when I first started hearing your name mentioned in golf circles. And I know that you were a regular and a top player on the celebrity tours. Is golf something that you were always just as passionate about as hockey? Or was this always sort of part of the plan that once your hockey days were done that you wanted to invest more time in golf?
Well, make a long story short, yes. My father and his father, my grandfather they loved golf. They were from the Ottawa area. My father grew up caddying in Ottawa as a kid on weekends. And so to make a long story short, when I was 12, my father got me into caddying on weekends, which spurred my, in the summertime when I wasn't playing hockey. And I was one of those kids. I played hockey in the hockey season only, but when it was over, I did other sports and fell in love with golf at an early age. I've caddied in Ontario Open when I was 12 years old in 1977 in London, Ontario, and played in the group behind Mo Norman. So, nobody knows that, and everybody at the time, all my buddies that now play hockey that took it up when they first, second, third year in the NHL. I was doing it from the age of 12, 13, played my first Ontario Junior when I was 14, and played in the Ontario Amateur, which very few people know that Gary Cowan won, if you're a golfer, sports fan, a legendary golfer in Canada. When I was 16, and that was a month after I was first overall in the Ontario Junior draft, but I made the cut, and I finished, I think, in the top 20. So to answer your question, I was into golf since I was pretty much into hockey, but I thought the hockey was a safer route. But I always had a love of golf, still do, and it probably hurt my career as I've continued to fall in love with it. And you mentioned the celebrity tournaments, and there was a big one in Lake Tahoe that I won in my 8th or 9th year in hockey, and so probably I played a little more golf than didn't know that the way they can train now. And so looking back, I wish I'd have maybe applied myself to hockey a little bit more. But the two sports were always my first and second loves.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because you did retire from professional hockey in your early 30s, and so many players talk in this show about hanging on till the very end, until they know that there's really no one left that will be offering to pay them to play hockey. But you left whenever I'm sure there was opportunities, and if not even in the NHL, that you could have went and played in Europe. But was that hunger for golf something that made you find it an easy decision at the time to leave the game in your early 30s?
Yes, because at the time, the economy was somewhat different. So there was this, as you mentioned, this celebrity tour that's now, none of us would have thought it would have ever dissolved so quickly, but after the regulations were put in 01 or 02. But at that time in '97, when I packed it in, there was 10 or 12 events. I was making, I think, $500,000 in the NHL, but it was not a stretch for me to be able to play and make $200,000 to $300,000 at golf. And I felt, I really struggled that things weren't going really well in '97. There was a clutch and grab era, for a skill player, if you remember, and it was a really difficult time for a lot of guys that were my size to play and have success and find room and the game, the quality of the game, and so on and so forth. So I was frustrated and just decided that if I was, still 32, to get after it. I went to tour school for 3 or 4 years. Never really, I applied myself, but because of those celebrity events to fall back on, I didn't go at it 100% that I needed to actually compete out there. But it's like anything then. If you go back 16 years or to that time, I guess it's 18 years now, the evolution of the training of everybody in golf and so on and so forth, as well as hockey, is unbelievable. But so to answer your question, that's why I sort of, I pushed off into the sunset and chased after the golf, and had a nice little run there at the celebrity stuff for about 5 or 6 years.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. I'm Darcy Lynch. This week my guest is former NHLer Dan Quinn. We've talked about your NHL playing days, and we've talked about your golf days on the celebrity tours, but then you've also caddied on the PGA Tour. And was that just a natural transition from playing and getting to know people on the tour, or how did you end up in the caddy world?
Well, it's not something I looked to do, but what happened was in my evolution, I moved to Florida. I've been down here 15, 16 years full time. It's grown into a golf mecca. When I couldn't make ends meet with the celebrity stuff, had died out, and I was turning around 40. I got into the golf and real estate business and had a nice role for a couple of years. But then it shortly, if you remember the financial crisis of '08, sort of consolidated, and those jobs went away. So long story short, Ernie Els asked me to go sometime in '09 to work for him, and I said no, I don't think I want to be a caddy. But then we ended up doing a little trip to Asia and came second in our second event, and I realized, the potential financially and so on and so forth. So I basically did a nice little partnership with him for 4 or 5 years, 4 years, I guess, and took on a couple of European young guys the last year and a half. But it just sort of happened. It's just making ends meet, and it's I don't know if it's what I set out to do, but it's been fun. At the same time, it's not something I'm looking to do for the next 10 years.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up Ernie Els. Is when I first realized, Dan, that you were in the caddying world and filling that role on the tour I think it's probably about 4 years ago now at the Canadian Open. I believe it was when it was in Vancouver. I was reading an article in the National Post, and it was talking about how you were there caddying for Ernie, but all of the focus, because of you being a former NHL player, that there was more media surrounding you than there was Ernie. What did he think about that experience? I'm sure he thought that could only happen in Canada.
Yeah, in certain times, in certain other parts of our relationship, he might not have handled it well. But that particular time, I worked all of 2010 with him, and then we didn't move forward in 2011. So we'd agreed though that I would do the Canadian Open that year out at Shaughnessy, and so we were we were buddy, and there wasn't the boss caddy relationship, so to speak, that can somehow get going on in a relationship like that, but. So he took it great. He played great. He'd had a horrible year up until that point, and if you look at, he went out. I think he was tied for the lead or whatever, and 2 or 3 guys took him to the side. And I don't know, for some reason, the popularity of the sport in Canada and hockey, which was nothing to do with my popularity, it was just the sport itself and the story. And yeah, there was about 10 or 12 guys around me. It was hilarious, and he embraced it and took a chuckle, and we still talk about it to this day.
And as I've mentioned, Gong Show Gear, the leader in hockey lifestyle apparel, based out of your hometown of Ottawa, is the sponsor of this show. And the Gong Show name itself has been used numerous times to describe a golfer from the PGA Tour that you're very familiar with, and that, of course, is John Daly. Talk a little bit about your relationship with John and how you got to know him through the years.
Well, yeah, I met, so when I quit in 97, that summer I got some invites to play in a couple of, at the time, Nike Tour events. His manager, was a friend of mine from Pittsburgh, where I called home, and he'd got me in a tournament called in Erie, Pennsylvania, called the Erie Classic. And I got paired with John. John at that time was just finished up a little bit of one of his incidents at the Players Championship, so he was trying to clean up some stuff, but then we got paired. He was so popular and so much fun, and he ended up coming and spending a couple 3 days at my house down in Pittsburgh, 2 hours south, because he had that was a Monday, Tuesday, so he had till the following week to go play some golf. And so he came down, and we kind of struck up a bit of a friendship and spent some time. Played with Mario played, and Pierre LaRouche, who was there at the time. We all played a little bit with John, and so I think it was 2 years there later. I was having success in golf, and had just won a golf tournament in Pittsburgh, shooting like 14 under over three days, and got a call that night from his agent, who was again my friend, and asked if I would be interested to go to Pebble Beach and caddy for John. And it wasn't the best experience, but it was that's how the sort of the relationship was. I still see John and see him a lot, but we're not friendly or talk a lot.
Well, and you mentioned when you made reference to Mario playing, and there's been times whenever we've talked about hockey players known for golf on the show, your name has came up, and guys like Mario and Grant Fuhr. But from the numerous NHLers and former NHLers that you've played with, who do you find is the best well-rounded golfer? You're certainly in a position that you'd be able to critique the golf game, and regardless of how they played on the ice, who do you find one of the most elite NHL golfers that we might not associate with the game as much?
Well, the one guy we played that beat me when I was pretty good was Norm McIver. Was the one, and he had a really sound golf swing. I think I don't know that he ever played anything or did anything, but he was the one guy. I remember playing only one time with him. Like I said, we weren't friends, and he didn't play much of the celebrity stuff, but he had a heck of a golf swing. And everybody talks. I mean, the big difference about all athletes and guys that have done it or do it to a different level, there's a lot of guys can play well on a Tuesday or Wednesday with their buddies or on a Saturday, but who knows how to play in an actual tournament and all of the different ups and downs. So there's a lot of different moving parts to that. Mario, when I used to play with him a lot, he matured as a golfer unbelievably from 86 to 96, and he knew how to play golf. And but eventually his back and his flexibility kind of caught up to him. So I don't know how much he plays and does now, but he actually had a great golf swing and could play a lot of good golf. But again, there's so many moving parts to a game of golf and who could be successful at it. I know Mike Modano's got a great golf swing. He's like me. He's a left-handed hockey player. He's moved to right-handed at golf, but he's got a beautiful golf swing. Still trying to figure out a lot of stuff. There's so many things that take so much time and meticulous practice, short game and putting to shoot scores. So I'm sure there's a lot of guys that have beautiful swings and hit the ball now. I haven't seen too many of the modern players, but I just remember Norm McIver is the one that I said was a heck of a golfer. I don't know what he's up to now, but
No, it's certainly a name from the past. I certainly remember him in the NHL, but it's not a name that heard recently. But that's interesting. It's interesting that his name would be top of mind. It must have been quite the game he had at the time.
Yeah, we had an NHL PA tournament or something of that. It was out in Halifax. I remember my old friend Charles Bourgeois was sort of the host, and I don't know if it was 91 or 2 or something like that. And but I remember he beat me, and he played. I just remember how good he was. He played brilliantly, and it was a lot of fun. But it's funny that you talk about the 1986, the Masters. Al McGuinness was my roommate. Never played golf in his life, but became a golf junkie after that Masters and the Jack Nicklaus one. And I think that a lot of the guys from our era, I know, never played golf. The guys they went and got clubs after the '86 Masters, and I think the same thing happened to a lot of athletes when Tiger won in '97. It sort of made the sport, cross-branded it, if for lack of a better word, and got it out of just being the golf mentality, and now it's sort of pretty cool to play golf. Whereas back when I played it, it wasn't cool. Guys would say in the off season, "You going to go fishing? You want to go boating?" No, I play golf. That's what I do. So it's funny how it's changed now that I think most guys probably play a lot in the summer.
Well, it's a very unique perspective that you can provide given your background in both sports. And I want to thank you for coming on, Dan. It's been very interesting talking to you. That so many former NHLers that come on this show talk about how tough it is to transition away from the NHL. There are numerous players who've had interests outside of the game, but they find, especially in those first couple of years after retiring from the NHL, that it's not necessarily the easiest to get yourself ingrained into another industry that you're interested in. But you were able to do that transition with golf and working in professional golf now for several years. That congratulations on being able to do that transition, and that things are working out for you well in Florida.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. I can't say it's been, like I say, it's not been all sunny, but it's been interesting. It's certainly been I just turned 50, so I'm actually a gym rat right now. I work out harder than I did when I played hockey, and I'm trying to see if I can maybe get to the senior school and for the first time in November. So that's where my focus is right now. But otherwise, it's not easy, but it's been at least I've had another passion to kind of take up my time.
Great stuff. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you, Darcy.
You've been listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the premier manufacturer of lifestyle hockey apparel. The new fall lineup is available now. Check it out at gongshowgear.com. Thanks to this week's guest, Dan Quinn. I'm Darcy Lynch. You can follow the show on Twitter at Darcy P. Lynch.
Top shelf classic lager, brewed using only the finest noble hops and Canadian malt. This crisp and refreshing lager aims high and scores big. From Lake Bay's Brewing Company in partnership with the NHL Alumni Association. Available at the LCBO and the beer store.